I don't know how to start this, but I guess I'll just dive right into it. My name is Andrew Morrison, and what I'm about to share with you is something that still haunts me every night. It happened not too long ago on a stormy night in early November. I work as a night shift manager at a small logistics company out in Hudsonville, Michigan, and I was working late that night, trying to catch up on some overdue reports. By the time I finally clocked out, it was nearly 1 a.m. The weather had been terrible all day. Heavy rain, fierce winds, kind of storm that makes you dread the thought of driving in it. But I didn't have much choice. The office was practically in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by fields and woods with the nearest house at least half a mile away. So I braced myself, got into my car, and started the long drive home. The rain pounded against the windshield, the wipers barely keeping up. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the empty, winding roads ahead. It was quiet, except for the occasional boom of thunder, made me jump every time it echoed through the bar. I took the usual route home, a long stretch of old pine road that led straight into the outskirts of Grand Rapids. That road always creeped me out a bit, especially at night. It's narrow, lined with dense trees that seem to close in on you the farther you go. That night, it felt particularly oppressive, like the storm was trying to swallow me whole. I was about halfway home when I noticed it. Headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it. It's not unusual for someone else to be on the road, even at that hour. But as I kept driving, something about the car behind me started to make me uneasy. The headlights would disappear around the curves, only to reappear again a few moments later, closer each time. And then, I realized something that made my blood run cold. Their headlights weren't on. It wasn't just that they were off. The car was practically invisible in the dark. Only the faintest outline visible when lightning occasionally flashed across the sky. My heart started to race, but I told myself it was just some idiot trying to be edgy, or maybe they didn't even realize their lights were off. I kept driving, trying to shake off the feeling of unease creeping up my spine. But the longer I drove, the more apparent it became that this car was following me. I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe they were going the same way. But when I turned onto a side road, a shortcut I sometimes took when the weather was bad, they turned too. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as I accelerated, my eyes flicking between the road and the rearview mirror. The car behind me sped up to match my pace, still with no headlights. I don't know why I didn't just pull over and confront them, or at least try to let them pass. But something about the whole situation felt off, like I was being hunted. The storm only made it worse, the relentless rain hammering against the car, the thunder rattling the windows. My phone was almost dead, no more than 3% battery left. I tried calling the police, but the signal kept dropping, and then the phone died completely. It was just me and that damned car. Finally, I saw the turn for my neighborhood, a small, quiet community on the outskirts of the city. I didn't even signal, just turned sharply and sped down the road. The car behind me hesitated for a second, then followed. My heart was pounding in my chest. As I reached my street, barely slowing down as I pulled into my driveway. I slammed on the brakes and threw the car into park, my eyes locked on the rearview mirror. The car slowed down as it approached my house, then came to a complete stop right in front of my driveway. It just sat there, idling in the middle of the road. No lights, no movement. I could barely see it through the sheets of rain, but I knew it was there, watching me. I don't know how long I sat in my car, too scared to move. The storm was still raging, and the car just sat there. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. Did I make a run for the house? Did I wait it out? But then, almost as if it sensed my panic, the car turned off its engine. It was completely dark now, no noise, no lights, just the sound of the rain and wind. I knew I had to get inside, call the police to do something. So I grabbed my keys, took a deep breath, and made a dash for the front door. The rain was freezing cold, soaking me to the bone in seconds. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking, but I managed to unlock the door and burst inside, slamming it shut behind me. My house was dark, the only light coming from the occasional flash of lightning. I didn't bother turning on the lights. I just ran to the kitchen, where I kept an old landline phone, praying that it still worked. I picked up the receiver and was about to dial when I heard it. A loud crash from outside, like something heavy being thrown against the side of the house. I froze, the phone clutched in my hand. Crash was followed by a scraping sound, like metal dragging against wood. My heart was in my throat as I crept to the window, peering out into the storm. The car was still there, but now the driver's side door was open, and there was someone, standing just outside of it. I couldn't make out any details through the rain, just a dark figure, tall and thin, almost skeletal. It was holding something in its hands, something long and metallic. I couldn't tell what it was, but the way it dragged it along the side of the house made my skin crawl. The figure started moving, slowly, deliberately, towards the front door. I panicked, dropping the phone and rushing to lock the door. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely turn the deadbolt. Just as I locked it, there was a loud bang, the door shuddering as if something had slammed into it. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. The banging continued, each hit more violent than the last. I could hear the wood creaking, the hinges straining under the force. I knew the door wouldn't hold much longer. Then, suddenly, it stopped. The silence was deafening, the only sound the rain pounding against the windows. I held my breath, waiting for something, anything to happen. But there was nothing. No more banging, no more scraping, just the storm outside. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place, waiting for whatever was outside to break in. But after what felt like an eternity, I heard it. A low, guttural growl, coming from just outside the door. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before, a sound that made my blood run cold. It wasn't human, and it wasn't an animal. It was something else. Something wrong. The growl was followed by a soft scratching, like claws against wood. It started at the bottom of the door and slowly moved up, the sound growing louder as it reached the top. My whole body was trembling, every instinct screaming at me to run, to hide, to do something. But I couldn't move, couldn't think. I was paralyzed with fear. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the scratching stopped. Growling ceased, and for a moment there was nothing but the sound of the storm. I slowly backed away from the door, my eyes fixed on it, half expecting it to burst open at any second. But it didn't. I don't know what compelled me to do it, but I found myself moving towards the window again, peering out through the curtains. The car was still there, its engine now running, and the figure was gone. For a moment, I thought maybe it had left, that whatever was out there had given up. But then I saw it, a shadowy shape moving along the side of the house, heading towards the back. I ran to the back door, checking to make sure it was locked. I could hear something moving outside, slow, deliberate footsteps, followed by that same low growl. It was getting closer, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it tried to break in again. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. I thought about grabbing a knife from the kitchen, about finding a place to hide, but nothing seemed like it would help. Whatever was out there, it wasn't something I could fight off with a kitchen knife. And hiding, well, it had already found me once. It would find me again. Footsteps stopped right outside the back door. I could hear the thing breathing, a raspy, labored sound that sent chills down my spine. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to make myself as small as possible, as if that would somehow make me invisible. The door rattled as something heavy pressed against it, the wood creaking under the pressure. And then, slowly, the doorknob started to turn. I don't know what came over me, but I bolted. I ran out of the kitchen, through the hallway, and into the living room. I didn't stop until I was on the other side of the house, my back pressed against the wall, my chest heaving as I struggled to catch my breath. The doorknob had stopped turning, but I knew it was only a matter of time before it got in. I looked around, desperate for anything I could use to defend myself, but there was nothing. The only thing in the room was an old fireplace poker, rusted and barely more than a decorative piece, but it was better than nothing. I grabbed it, holding it in front of me like a makeshift weapon, and waited. The sound of glass breaking shattered the silence, followed by the crash of something heavy hitting the floor. It had gotten in. I could hear it moving through the house, its footsteps heavy and deliberate. It was searching for me, hunting me down like prey. I pressed myself harder against the wall, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it could hear it. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just outside the living room door. I could see its shadow through the crack in the door, a twisted, distorted shape that made my stomach turn. It was standing there, just waiting. And then, slowly, the door creaked open. It was standing there, hunched over, its long, thin arms hanging limply at its sides. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes, God, its eyes were the worst part. They were completely black, like voids, empty and soulless. It stared at me for what felt like an eternity, its mouth slowly curling into a grotesque grin. I don't remember much after that. I remember screaming, swinging the poker wildly, and then nothing. Just darkness. When I woke up, it was morning. The storm had passed, the house was eerily quiet, and I was lying on the floor of the living room, poker still clutched in my hand. There was no sign of the creature, no sign that it had ever been there at all. But the door was broken, the glass shattered, and the marks on the walls, those were real. I don't know what happened that night, what that thing was, or why it came after me. But I know one thing for sure. I'll never forget those black eyes. Twisted grin. I moved out of that house the next day, left everything behind. But no matter where I go, I can't escape the memory of that night. The terror that still grips me every time I close my eyes. I don't know if it will ever come back, but I live in fear every day, waiting for the moment when I'll hear those footsteps again. That low growl, the sound of something scraping against the walls. And I know, deep down, that if it does come back, I won't survive it.